Trump makes huge statements. Everyone sees more or less what they want to see. Some people see, oh, you betrayed the Ukrainians because we have to fight till the bitter end. Others are celebrating because yeah, he's bringing an end to the war. But there's also some confusing messages here. How do you see this?
U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth laid out the entire plan, right out again, hidden in plain sight. He's talking about going from 2% to 5% of GDP in terms of European GDP expenditure on NATO. So we're talking about enlarging NATO. He's also talking about Western forces placed in Ukraine as peacekeepers to essentially freeze the conflict. This is exactly what the U.S. did in Syria. I mean, we all just watched that whole process unfold, and we saw the final result. They wanted to appear as if they were pursuing peace, but they were really just buying time. Worse than that, this is a cycle that has repeated itself specifically in regards to Russia. People aren't looking at that. Again, just as you say, Glenn, they're seeing and hearing what they want to see and hear, and they're ignoring everything else, including a very clear pattern that has emerged. I have a timeline here where we remember the Bush Jr. administration, all throughout it, antagonism, aggression, proxy war against Russia. They literally did the exact same thing, but instead of Ukraine, they used Georgia from 2003 when they overthrew the government to 2008 as they militarized Georgia and then encouraged them to attack Russian forces. They walked away from arms control treaties. They put pressure on Russia. They demonized Russia. And then in 2009, under the Obama administration, because they hit a brick wall, Russia crushed the Georgian military and they hit a brick wall. So they needed to buy time to get their next proxy ready and get ready for the next push. So under the Obama administration in 2009, they did this big reset featuring then U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, of all people. I remember it. She's posing with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. They had a physical prop, a reset button, and and Hillary Clinton was smiling ear to ear all while they were doing this. The Obama administration was planning to finally and completely overthrow the government of Ukraine. And in 2014, they did. And then from 2014 to 2022, they did the same thing they did with Georgia, arming it, training the Ukrainian forces, building out NATO infrastructure. It wasn't officially NATO infrastructure, but it was obviously Western military infrastructure for use by NATO in the future. And remember, it was the Trump administration that began publicly arming Ukraine and enthusiastically. And even to this day, he still brags about that. It was also under the Trump administration that the US walked away from another arms control treaty, just like the Bush administration. He even began sanctioning Europe over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. This is what he said, that Germany is going to become a hostage of Russia. This is language that we normally associate with the Biden administration. This was also, again, people selectively hearing, being said during the first Trump administration. And of course, we know the end result here. Russia reacted with the special military operation because what is NATO? Why does it exist? It exists for the sole purpose of encroaching upon, encircling, containing Russia, and eventually absorbing Russia itself. That's why it exists. And this is why Russia is reacting to it in a sense of self-preservation. From 2022 to 2025, we watched this conflict unfold. The U.S. exhausted its arms and ammunition, and it has hit another brick wall. So what do you think comes next? A reset. And it just so happens that President Trump is the man in office, probably the perfect candidate for convincingly selling this reset. Again, getting this whole cycle to go around all over again. But again, if we listen to Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, he's laying out a program of freezing the conflict, buying time to expand NATO, its budget, expand the U.S., and Europe's military industrial base. For what? What do they need to expand it for? Do you remember during his recent talk in Brussels, he said, the one lesson we learned from this conflict is that if you ignore your military industrial base, you're going to lose the war. So we need to expand our military industrial base. Do you think they actually learned anything about this whole conflict in Ukraine other than they need more weapons and arms. So the next time they try this, they succeed. I mean, that's what they're saying. And if you listen, if you cut through the left-right paradigm, just listen to what they're saying. That is literally what they're saying. That's what they're laying out. And of course, it's not to ramble on too much, but Russia has to be polite. They have to be patient, and they have to go along with this. They have to at least publicly grant benefit of the doubt to the United States, because if they didn't, it would look very badly. It would play right into the Americans' hands. So, oh, we're trying to reach out and establish peace, and you will not. And there's a heavy element of that with the whole Trump plan to have the U.S., Russia, and China have their military budgets. But that is some trickery. Also, maybe we could get into that later or at another time.
Yeah, no, well, that's what I meant, these confusing messages. Because first, the Washington saying that we'll put more sanctions on the Russians, we'll drive down the oil prices to crush the Russian economy, and then Marco Rubio's arguing, yeah, well, we might end sanctions. I'm not sure. Again, always, is this just displaying a carrot and a stick, or talking to different audiences, or just being disingenuous? But as you said, they also want to increase NATO financing to 5%, but they're also, and they said they want to make NATO great again, whatever that might mean. But at the same time, Trump saying, we should disarm, cut our budgets, defense budgets with the Russians and the Chinese. They're also calling for more arms control. And at the same time, of course, it was Trump who ripped up all of these agreements for arms control in his first administration. So, yeah, that's why it's reasonable to at least reasonable to ask the question, well, why is this being done? Is there some desire to wind down the empire, or is this just, oops, we lost the war, we have to, as I said, do a reset, which we, remobilize and prepare for the next conflict. But but this is also why the Russians are insisting that in Ukraine, whatever deal comes, it has to be permanent, and there has to be a political solution, because otherwise, this has been going on since 2014 now, and they see that every deal they made with the West, from the deal they did back in 2014 with the unity government in Kiev, the Minsk agreement, the Istanbul agreement. Every time there's an effort to make a deal, or a deal has already been made, it's always either undermined or sabotaged. So they want this, which is why I'm wondering that now the Americans are saying, well, Rubio said we need a permanent end to this war, not just a temporary ceasefire, which is what the Russians want to hear. But at the same time, he's talking about, these peacekeepers, possible, security guarantees from the Europeans, even though the United States might not join in. It's, also Rubio said we might, unipolarity is over, which suggests now we have to be one among many other great powers, which sounds great. Now you can begin to harmonize interests. America doesn't have to pursue security through dominance, its ability to take into account each other's consideration. At the same time, they seem to be upping the ante against the Chinese. So why do you need to knock out the Chinese if you're happy with being one among many? And of course, Trump taking credit for Nord Stream, I think that was a good point as well. This is it's a very strange thing to make, but also to be critical here, though, it's are they being belligerent, or are they faking belligerence? Because often you need a hawkish language in order to get away with peace. So, for example, I think Reagan was the only one who could get away with sitting down with the Soviets and trying to end the Cold War, given that he was such a hawk. No one would accuse him of being soft. They said the same thing applied to Russia. That is, the Yeltsin would never have been able to make a deal with the Chinese to make territorial concessions. But Putin, no one would accuse him of being weak on Russian sovereignty. So he was in a stronger position to do so. And of course, Trump learned some lessons in 2016 that he was. He wanted to get along with Russia, and he was punished and labeled an agent of Russia. So, are they faking to some extent their belligerence, or are they faking their kindness or their willingness to change path completely? How would you find an indicator, I guess, for what they're actually doing? Because again, with Trump, much like in the Middle East, they make all this noise and a big splash, and in this chaos, they seem to be, charting a path, navigating something. They wouldn't have been able to, challenge the status quo without making such a mess. But do you have any, I guess it's too much to ask, but any damning evidence that they're definitely going this direction?
I mean, there is evidence. We just look at the history of all of it. Yes, President Reagan worked out all of this with the Soviet Union, but then look at how that played out. Look at what the U.S. eventually did to the Soviet Union and then to the nascent Russian Federation after the collapse. The U.S. and the UK specifically went in there and they plundered the country. And if they could have, they would have kept Russia in that state had it not been for the rise of President Putin and the people around him. They would have subordinated Russia indefinitely to US European interests. And that is their end game. That is what they want to do. And I think you said it, Glenn. Oops, we lost this conflict. We lost this conflict. We hit a brick wall. What do we do? We're not going to give up. And we know for a fact that they're not giving up because they're pivoting to China to pursue the exact same conflict, a conflict predicated entirely on the US, encroaching upon undermining Chinese sovereignty and attempting to eliminate the political circles in China, obstructing the reassertion of American primacy worldwide. I mean, when you just listen to the US, doesn't matter which president, they're always talking about American primacy in Asia. It's on the other side of the planet from where the US is located on a map. Why are they trying to assert primacy there? Why isn't it the largest, most powerful country in the region, which is China? Why don't they have primacy if any nation is to have primacy? And the interesting thing is China does not even seek primacy. They're working together with the other nations here. And I've lived here long enough to see the transition. Almost my entire adult life, I've lived here in Asia. And I moved here in the early 2000s when the US still mostly dominated the region before this rapid rise of China. And I saw the conditions here. And I watched as China rose, the conditions rapidly improving with it because it's an entirely different model. It's not just China taking the place of the United States. It's an entirely different mindset and approach, and it is tangibly, obviously better. And that is why it's so troubling to see the US so persistent on and trying to reassert this, to watch this region roll back. The same way the US and Europe have kept Africa for generations, the Middle East for about 100 years now. It would be a tragedy to see that happen here. And people have to keep that in mind. Yes, the Trump administration is at least, if you want to take it for face value, you could pretend that they're seeking peace with Russia. At the same time, again, it's the exact same conflict they're pursuing with China. They have absolutely no reason, no justification. China poses no threat at all whatsoever to the continental United States or even American interests beyond unwarranted interests. The desire to exercise power and control over everyone on Earth is not a legitimate interest that you can complain about China undermining. So people have to keep that in mind. They have to zoom out, look at the whole picture. What is he really saying? He says he wants peace with Russia, but he's rushing off to war with China. The exact same kind of conflict that he's trying to apparently wrap up with Russia. But again, I just looking at the cycle of history, it is, at least to me, it is painfully obvious we're going in another cycle where the US is buying time. They have no interest in accommodating Russia. This is when was the last time they have ever done this? Ever? Never. Including during the previous Trump administration. This has never happened, never even attempted, never even fleshed out in any real way. So why do we think now it's happening? Why aren't we suspicious that this is just because, as anyone can now see, even the Western media admits, Ukraine is losing. The US is losing the proxy war. They're out of arms and ammunition. They couldn't do anything even if they wanted to. So obviously they're reacting to that, not some sudden interest in peace after 100, 200 years of war, expansionism, imperialism.
Yes, it's interesting. You said threat to national security, but it's also this issue now when you have hegemonic policy, when your security is defined as having global primacy. then of course any threat to hegemony is a threat to your security. And
Yes.
a few months ago, yeah, towards the end of the Biden administration, there was one of the spokespeople for the government was making this argument that any attempt to diversify away from the dollar is a threat to democracy. And the wheels started slowly go around. Like, how does this work? Oh yeah, you threaten the dollar, you threaten the hegemon. If you threaten the hegemon, you threaten our security. And if America is the only reason why the world has democracy, so our hegemon is linked to democracy. And if you go through this reasoning, I guess it could make sense. But but if this is the goal for United States to not scale back, but simply change its strategy, that is, they do recognize this is a concept between the Chinese and Russians are a huge concern. It's the spearheading effectively the Eurasianism or Eurasian integration, which is undermining U.S. hegemony. So obviously under the Biden administration, the main goal was, as they kept saying over and over again, let's knock out the Russians and then we can focus our resource on the Chinese. It didn't work. I guess the reasonable or logical plan B at least would be to, okay, let's do what we did in Cold War. Let's reach out to the weaker of the two. This time it's the Russians, and we'll take them away from China. And this is the way we'll restore our dominance. And I find this to be interesting because this kind of shift in strategy, no one represents this better, I guess, than General Keith Kellogg, because 2 years ago he was, giving the speech. I think most people have seen it. We argued that, the destroying a strategic rival like Russia without using any American troops. He called this is the acme of professionalism. That is, we're destroying one adversary without using our troops, and then this will allow us to shift our focus and resources on confronting the Chinese. And yeah, I thought this was interesting. I even tweeted about it. I tweeted the video with the comment, and he actually wrote back on Twitter going, "Oh, thanks, Glenn. I got this from Sun Tzu." And again, I find this to be strange because I think he misunderstood what Sun Tzu meant in terms of, you know, winning a battle without fighting. In terms of pushing these two giants together, which was so unnecessary given that Russia's key objective after the Cold War is primarily integrate with the West. So, anyways, I thought it was funny his reply to me. But what's interesting is he shifted now because at the Munich peace conference, he was saying, well, yeah, more or less, yeah, the war is over. Yeah, we have to make some concessions to Russia, but then he also stated that we have to unwind or disentangle some of these alliances which have appeared, because now the Russians are allied with themselves, with the Chinese, with the Iranians, with the North Koreans. This didn't happen. This didn't exist before the war. So now it's time to, yeah, try to win them over and break these ties. But it just, as you said, I lived I worked in Russia for a while as well, and they, with people who have like a foot or two inside the Kremlin, and they do see through this. Indeed, we did the same thing to the Chinese during the past 3 years. All these American leaders who were saying, let's destroy the Russians and then we can focus on China. And then they go to China and say, hey, can you help us end the war? No, not actually negotiate or talk to the Russians, but let's just put pressure on them. In other words, help us to make the Russians capitulate. And at the same time, we're saying to our own audience, once we defeated the Russians, then we'll take the Chinese. So you want to help the Chinese destroy themselves. I'm just wondering if they're cooking up a similar deal for the Russians. We'll embrace you. You'll be our best friend, but you're gonna have to turn on the Chinese. And once we've broken them, the foundation of our friendship is gone. Do you see this? Can this succeed though, or because I know many people in Russia, they're excited that finally the war can come to an end. The Americans are talking about Russian security concerns. They're recognizing that NATO expansion was something that threatened their security, which caused the war. So they're hearing everything they want. Do you think they can get swept away in this new enthusiasm of a new reset, as it was?
No, they definitely are. I don't, there's definitely people in Russia being swept away by this. There are even people in China being, buying into this, and because they want to believe that there isn't going to be this catastrophic confrontation with the US. They want to believe that this is all going to work out for them, but it's not going to. There's going to be a catastrophic confrontation. It's going to happen, and the longer you live in denial, the worse it will be for you when it finally comes. Look at US history. Look at everything that they have done. Look at what they're doing even right now. Out of one side of President Trump's mouth, he's talking about reconciling and recognizing the interests of Russia. Out of the other side of his mouth, he's talking about crushing BRICS. And why? Again, it's back to your point, Glenn. They are still pursuing global dominance. Again, go to the Senate hearings. Marco Rubio, his Senate hearing for confirmation as Secretary of State, Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, Jamison Greer as U.S. Trade Representative. All they talked about for 2, 3, 4 hours was China, China, China. And it doesn't matter what topic they brought up. China is their obsession. And Russia is also part of it, but they understand that it's not working in Ukraine. They see it. It's just a fact that they have to reconcile with. Not that they want to. They don't want to. They don't want to admit that they've failed in Ukraine, just like there's a lot of Russians that don't want to admit that they failed in Syria. But they have. And if they want to continue pursuing global dominance, they need to recognize that, adapt and overcome it. And that's what they're doing. That is what the Trump administration is doing. That was actually what the Biden administration was doing. Again, see through the left-right rhetoric. They were both doing the exact same thing. The Biden administration for all 4 years, even though they seemed utterly obsessed on Russia, the entire time they were reorganizing the U.S. military to fight China in the Asia-Pacific region. They created the perfect stage. They set the perfect stage for the Trump administration to now pivot toward China. This is what is called continuity of agenda. And if you look through the rhetoric, you will see each administration step by step by step preparing for the next administration to continue all of this forward toward this continuous pursuit of global dominance. And they even literally use these words in the US Senate during their hearings. Each candidate, each nominee was talking about maintaining US dominance, political dominance, economic dominance, military dominance. And it's an irrational premise because the US represents only 5%, less than 5% of the global population. China alone has 4, 5 times the population of the US. It doesn't make sense to insist on not only dominating China, but dominating the entire planet. It doesn't make any sense, but this is from, generations of American, Western, I would say Western, European, and American supremacy. It's deeply rooted in their psyche, and this is what is driving them. And so at the end of the day, I don't hear them talking about dismantling NATO. Why does NATO exist? Can they explain why NATO exists? I hear U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance lecturing Europe about how dependent they are on the U.S. for security. Security against what? Before the U.S. overthrew the government of Ukraine in 2014, Europe was working very closely with both Russia and China to their benefit. And since the collapse of the Ukrainian government, thanks to U.S. intervention, Europe has done nothing but pay at their expense for this encroachment on Russia, this dismemberment of Ukraine's sovereignty, its rebuilding as a battering ram against Russia, and then this whole proxy war that has unfolded as a result. This has come at the expense of Europe, economically, politically, in terms of social stability. All of their prospects for the future gone because of this. So what security is the U.S. underwriting? It seems to me they obliterated European security. And so as long as people fall for this rhetoric, they're going to continue getting away with it. So it's only going to be when people finally say enough is enough. I'm not going to fall for the left-right rhetoric. I'm going to actually listen to what they're really saying because they are saying it openly, laying it all out for everyone to see. And I'm going to look at what they're actually doing, and I'm going to question what they're doing, not just because now it's my guy. I'm going to turn my brain off for the next 4 years and go along with everything. I'm going to think critically, no matter who is in office, and get to the bottom of what is really going on so that we can arrive at some sort of solution. I would say that no matter how, maybe it's a strong word, but delusional some people have become recently, they have the best intentions at heart. They don't want to see war. They don't want to see Russia and America fighting. I don't think they genuinely want war with China. They want this to resolve itself in peace and cooperation worldwide. But that's not what the special. You have to think like follow the money. Who is President Trump ultimately working for? What interests? Who's getting hundreds of billions of dollars already pledged by the Trump administration and the Biden administration and every administration before that? The arms industry, big pharma, big oil, all of these deeply entrenched corporate financier monopolies. These are the people driving U.S. foreign and domestic policy, no matter who is in office. So how is it that their interests are somehow now suddenly not being served by the Trump administration all of a sudden? It doesn't add up.
Yeah, I guess that's the greatest challenge in assessing the Trump administration. As we talked about already, this yeah, cutting through the noise and see what's actually being done. Because yeah, you see the same in the Middle East. They would like to end the forever war, but also annex Gaza and ethnically cleanse the entire population. They want to rebuild Ukraine, but also take half of its natural resources. And of course, there's a campaign against the deep state, but at the same time, the entire front row of Trump's inauguration appeared to be the
The
tech
deep state.
oligarchs.
Yes.
So there are some mixed signals, and I guess, as you said, yeah, we see what we want to see.